So I have some notes here, so excuse me if I look down as I read. As Iris said, my name is Karen Weeks, and while I'm not a resident of Oakmont, I was asked to introduce my friend and colleague, Miles Horton. I first met Miles a little after he moved to Santa Rosa in 2023 when we were working on a political campaign, and I found a kindred political nerd spirit in him, and we just hit it off. Miles is the Legislative Policy and Community Engagement Manager at Sonoma Clean Power, where he represents our community in Sacramento and champions policies that deliver affordable clean energy and protect ratepayers here at home. He also helps to lead the community and stakeholder engagements of Sonoma Clean Power's GeoZone project, which he will be discussing this morning. Prior to joining Sonoma Clean Power in 2023, Miles worked in Sacramento at the Capitol for various elected officials, including as a senior consultant to the California State Assembly and as a legislative director and legislative aide. Earlier this year, Miles was appointed to the Santa Rosa's Planning Commission by Council Member Banuelos. As chair, I am very grateful for the hard work and thoughtful comments that Miles brings to the commission. And if you want an example of that, go online and watch last Thursday's meeting. Miles also serves on the board of Latino Service Providers, a Roseland-based nonprofit that helps young people and families. In addition, he represents Sonoma Clean Power on the board of the North Bay Leadership Council. And last but not least, I was pleased to be his guest earlier this year when Miles was named one of the 40 under 40 in Sonoma County by the Business Journal. Miles is the oldest of four. He grew up in the Richmond district in San Francisco, and his family lives in San Francisco and Marin County today. After high school, Miles attended Williams College in Massachusetts, where he received a BA in political economics. Miles is a passionate bird watcher, so if you are too, you have found a kindred spirit. As you can tell, I'm very proud to call Miles my friend, so hope I have embarrassed you thoroughly. Here you go, Miles.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you, Karen, for that warm introduction. I mean, I'm just so lucky to have you in my life. So, really excited to be here today to talk about our GeoZone effort. This is one of the most, I think, significant things we're looking at as not just as Sonoma Clean Power, but as a community in terms of our ability to fight the global climate crisis and make a difference in the world. So, just really appreciate you coming out. So let me just reintroduce Sonoma Clean Power first. I think a lot of you are probably very familiar, but we are your community-owned power provider. We've been serving this area, Sonoma and Mendocino counties, for 11 years now. And the best way I can describe it is basically what we do is we go out and get the electricity for this region, and then PG&E still controls the wires that send it to the customer. And so we'll go out and sign deals with, Joe's power plant or Sally's solar farm or whatever, find the best deals for those customers. And then, again, PG&E still controls the transmission lines and the distribution lines that get it to your house. And you get actually, I'm going to use my cool tool here. You get it doesn't have it on here. One bill from PG&E that includes our charge and PG&E's charge, just to make your life a little simpler. So our value proposition is threefold. We were formed to provide cleaner energy than what PG&E was providing. That was basically our kind of raison d'etre. But we also have been able to do that at very competitive rates. So earlier this year, we were saving people about 7% on their total bill as compared to PG&E. That means that for the third of the bill that we control, we were about 20% cheaper than PG&E. Now we're about at parity. But so cleaner energy, competitive rates, and then local control over our energy supply and our kind of customer programs and helping people get what they need on the energy front, right? We were really created so that local communities could take control of our energy future. And that's what the GeoZone effort that we're going to hear about today is really all about. So one thing we're really proud of at Sonoma Clean Power is that we're leading the way on clean energy for the state and actually for the country and for the world in a lot of ways. We're one of the best. Our default product, the basic electricity that we serve our customers, is more than 90% clean energy today, which is really ahead of the curve. California is at about 55% clean or carbon-free energy today. And I think, this is obviously a very well-informed group. I think most people know this, but just to recap, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas to create electricity or for transportation fuel or for heating or for any other purpose, when you burn those, the byproduct is carbon dioxide and other what are called greenhouse gases that go up into the atmosphere and make this blanket of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere thicker. And so what happens is, since the Industrial Revolution, we've been burning more and more of these fuels. That blanket of greenhouse gases that we need to live, that we need to keep us, warm, so we're not exposed to the kind of coldness of space, is just getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And this is leading to all kinds of negative consequences as the Earth's temperature very rapidly increases, right? So heat waves, drier, hotter conditions that fuel these fires, more floods, more droughts, more extremes, right? And so that's what we're trying to take on. That's the gist of the climate crisis that we're trying to take on. And the solution is using alternatives like wind power, like solar power, and like geothermal that do not release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that can create that same electricity or that same energy for transportation or whatever it is, but don't have that byproduct. And so again, we're using about 90% clean energy that doesn't produce greenhouse gases today. So we should take pride in that as a community. But we're still not doing well enough. We are relying on dirty natural gas plants like the one shown here at times when there's no sun, no wind, and our batteries are empty or depleted. And this has several negative effects. So first of all, every time we burn natural gas, like we were just talking about, our clean power company is contributing to the climate crisis, which is antithetical to our mission. I think, this community has a very strong interest in taking that climate crisis on and getting to 100% clean energy. Most of the natural gas plants we rely on and others in California rely on are located in the LA area, where they're sited in these lower income, disadvantaged communities that have to deal with the toxic pollution they produce just in that immediate area. There's over 200,000 children in LA with asthma. It's really sad. That's half the population of Sonoma County almost. The American Lung Association recently gave LA an F grade for its air quality, the worst in the country. And then, production of that natural gas upstream involves practices like fracking that we oppose as an organization that can pollute groundwater, that can cause all sorts of negative local health impacts and release all sorts of chemicals in the area where the gas comes from. So locally here in Sonoma and Mendocino counties, we don't have to deal with these impacts, but they are happening so that we can keep the lights on. And all power providers in California are using these gas plants, but we want to be on the cutting edge of weaning off our reliance on them completely. There is another impact, though, that is very direct to our customers, which is the financial impact, and the slide kind of alludes to that. These gas plants are very, very expensive to maintain. California has a law that says we have to use 100% clean electricity by 2045. So nobody is going to build a new fossil fuel power plant today. And we support that. But what that means is that these aging, outdated gas plants are kind of kept on life support because we still need them, but not getting replaced. And so what's happening for Sonoma Clean Power, and I think to everyone else even more so because they're using it even more, is even as our share of clean energy in our portfolio increases, we're actually sending more and more money to these gas plants over time because they're just becoming increasingly expensive to maintain. And so that's sort of the kind of prelude to what we're going to talk about today is how do we get to 100% clean energy around the clock, even when there's no sun, no wind, batteries are empty, and do it in a way that actually saves our customers money because we don't have to pay for these incredibly expensive resources to sort of stand by for backup. So like I mentioned, the basic crux of the problem is, we need these gas plants to keep the lights on at times when other resources like solar, wind, batteries may not be available. Here's a picture of Windsor at, I think, at dusk. It's kind of that time of day, right? Everyone's coming home. They're turning, especially in the winter. Maybe there wasn't a lot of solar power during the day to replenish batteries because it was a cloudy day. Everyone comes home at dusk. They're turning on their washing machine, their TV, their lights, whatever. And meanwhile, the sun is going down. What little solar we had is sort of coming off. Batteries aren't very full. Maybe it's not a very windy day. That's when we're really, that's the kind of situation when we're paying these gas plants to fire up. And again, it's incredibly expensive. What we found as an organization over our 11 years is that getting new clean energy online has actually become pretty straightforward in a lot of ways. We buy a lot of solar power, a lot of wind power, a lot of batteries, but the challenge is getting that clean reliability, the clean energy that can run around the clock or sort of fill in the gaps between those other resources. That can actually replace our dependence on natural gas. That's what's really hard. And the thing that's sort of compounding all this is our demand for electricity is growing for the first time in decades. Between new electric vehicles, new electric heating, artificial intelligence, data centers requiring a ton of electricity, all electric buildings. A lot of this we really support and is very good for our society and the climate, but it's driving demand for electricity up for the first time. And so all these challenges are sort of compounding at the same time, coming to a head. And I think that's sort of what we're looking at here is how do we solve all these challenges at once while saving our customers money and fulfilling our mission as your publicly owned power provider to reinvest in the local community. So the good news is there are a lot of solutions, and we're pursuing many of them, from new energy efficiency programs to actually paying customers to save energy at key times of day when the grid is strained through our Grid Savvy program, to much more. But the biggest component of our vision here is this GeoZone initiative that we're about to discuss. Our fundamental goal is to build affordable, reliable, clean energy that also creates well-paying jobs in the process and keeps those economic benefits here in our local community. That was kind of the framework that allowed our analysts to identify next generation geothermal power as the right solution, or kind of the key part of the solution for us. So what is the GeoZone? Well, the GeoZone is Geothermal Opportunity Zone is really the name, is our effort to build 600 megawatts of new next generation geothermal power here in our service area in Sonoma and Mendocino counties. And so let me just kind of dissect that. So what we're trying to do is work with private geothermal developers to, again, build 600 megawatts, which is a very, very large amount, of new geothermal power plants here in Sonoma and Mendocino counties, using these next generation technologies that have just become available in the last few years. And I'll go a lot more into that in a sec. What's really exciting is if we can get this done, and this is a long-term project, right? This is not overnight. But if we can get it done, there'll be a lot of advantages for the local community. We'll be able to lock in long-term contracts for local, reliable power so that our customers and our costs aren't as subject to the kind of whims of the global energy market. And you talk about natural gas. I mean, when one country invades another country, the price can go through the roof, right? With local geothermal power replacing natural gas, we won't be as subject to that. We'll also, if successful, create a large number of well-paid, highly skilled jobs and generate economic activity. So geothermal power plants, they create a lot of jobs. These jobs are naturally highly skilled, highly trained, very well-paid jobs in the pipe trades or the sheet metal workers or electrical workers, whatever it is. It's naturally these sort of very high quality, typically unionized jobs. And actually, one thing that's very exciting is you want to talk about in California, oil and gas workers who are getting displaced as we switch to clean energy. Well, geothermal is the exact same skill set. It's the same kind of, piping, metal work, stuff like that. And so it's an exciting opportunity to kind of create jobs for people displaced from oil and gas that are still well paid and still really high quality. And then again, our mission as an agency is to help fight the climate crisis, right? To help solve climate change. And through the GeoZone, our goal is to be kind of the tip of the spear in terms of incubating these emerging technologies that could be used to fight climate change around the world. So conventional geothermal, and I'll get into this in a minute, has done a lot of great work for our community, for the world, but it has limitations. What's exciting is these new next generation technologies could be used on a much, much broader scale. to fight climate change. So that's the high level on the GeoZone. So let me just give a quick refresh on what geothermal power is. Did anybody here work in the geothermal industry up at the geysers or anything? Fantastic. Okay, I'll try to sound extra smart then. No, I'm kidding. That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, as many of you are probably aware, we're very blessed to have the largest geothermal field on Earth here in Sonoma and Lake counties up at the Geysers complex. And that's mostly controlled by Calpine Corporation and then a little bit by Northern California Power Agency. So we have a long history in this region with geothermal, and just a really fantastic resource for a lot of reasons. So the way it works at a really kind of reductive level is you take a supply of water, and I'm going to see if this works. You take that cold water and you send it down, deep underground to a place where magma under the Earth's surface is warming the solid rock directly above it to a very high temperature. And you send that cold water down, and you pass that water through the area where it's going to be exposed to that really hot rock, right? And just the Earth's natural heat heats up that water to steam or very, very hot water. And then you have another well at the back end that brings it back up. And that steam, or, let's just say it's steam, it could be steam or hot water, but it basically, powers a steam engine that spins a turbine that generates electricity. And then what you do is you lose some of that steam to the atmosphere, but again, if anyone's been to the geysers, you can see they condense and recapture a lot of that water, and then just send it back down again. And so historically, for a situation like the geysers, you needed three components, and this is really around the world. You needed these three components to do geothermal energy. You needed hot rock close to the Earth's surface, close enough that you could drill down to it, right? That you can reach it. You needed natural fractures in that rock that water can move through. And then you needed a steady supply of water, because what happens is you end up losing some amount of water, dissipates out into those fractures underground, or you lose the steam at the surface, or what have you. So having those three things together is pretty rare, right? And so that's why I think geothermal has been somewhat limited in its scope until recently. But what's exciting is now with these new technologies that we're pursuing, and that a lot of others are too, you only need the hot rock close to the surface. You don't need natural fractures in the rock, and you don't need that large supply of water. And so you can look at doing geothermal in a lot more places all around the world, and especially in California. We're probably the best place in the country in terms of hot rock close to the Earth's surface. We're the best place in the country for conventional geothermal, but now for these new technologies I will tell you about, we're even better. So it's really, really an exciting time. And these new technologies have only emerged in the last few years. So on the, I guess it's the left here, is what I just described, the conventional geothermal, like what you have at the geysers. And again, that's finding that natural fracture system underground, sending water down, passing it through, it gets heated up, bring it back, as steam, you lose some of the steam, and then you send it back down along with some new water. And you might be asking yourselves, when we have the biggest geothermal field on Earth here in Sonoma County today, why are we even doing this? Why aren't we just buying from that? Well, the answer is we do actually. We, Sonoma Clean Power, buy a lot of power from the geysers today, from Calpine. The problem is, not the problem, this is a good thing, but they're tapped out. All that power is already bought up by different power providers all around the state. And so if we want more, we have to go out and make it happen ourselves. So that's what we're trying to do. So these are two of the new technologies that we're looking at. One is this, and that's a typo, I apologize, closed loop geothermal system. And the other is what's called enhanced geothermal systems. And so it's basically a similar concept, but I'll give you the rundown of each. So with a closed loop geothermal system, it's basically what it sounds like. You find a place where solid hot rock is close to the Earth's surface, and you actually don't want natural fractures in that rock. Because what you do is you drill down, and then you drill horizontally, and then you just drill right back up. Or you drill down again and connect it. And you just keep the water circulating in this closed system the entire time. And so you actually don't want natural fractures, because then the water would leak out, right? You want to be able to totally control the flow of water. And this is, And I apologize, I'm really realizing this slide needs a tiny bit of work. This shows a little steam coming out at the top. That, we'll delete that. That's inaccurate. It's just closed the entire time. So you bring it back up to steam, then you condense the steam within this closed system and just use the same water over and over again. And so again, as compared to conventional geothermal, you need hot rock, you need fractures in that rock, and you need supply of water. You only need hot rock here, and then you just you create your own passageway through the rock, and you just use the same relatively limited amount of water over and over and over again. So that's closed loop. And we're working with a company based out of Canada called Ever to try and develop that here. And then enhanced geothermal systems are actually probably the new technology that's shown the most potential. And this basically is similar to closed loop, where you drill down, but then instead of drilling horizontally, you create an artificial fracture in the rock horizontally. And so you don't drill, you just hydraulically fracture it basically to connect it with another well at the back end. And so we'll get more into how that works in a second. But this is a technology that's only emerged in the last few years, and that's shown a ton of potential. I actually had the chance to go with two of our Sonoma County supervisors, Linda Hopkins and James Gore, to a site in Utah called Cape Station, where they're doing enhanced geothermal at a very large scale, and just see kind of how it works and how it relates to what we're trying to do here. And it was incredibly exciting. I mean, they're producing, they're on track to produce hundreds of megawatts, if not, thousands of megawatts of renewable energy in a site that, is large, but is smaller than even a medium-sized solar field. I mean, it's just very land efficient, very water efficient, because you're using that same water over and over again. And, it was great to see the well-paid jobs that were being created there too. Actually, as an aside, the only thing that we didn't like was that it's being built entirely to serve California customers, but all the jobs and investment is going to Utah. So that's what we're trying to fix here. So why did we hone in on next generation geothermal energy? I think, again, I kind of alluded to this, but there's a lot of real advantages to making this the linchpin of our strategy to get to 100% clean energy and do it in a way that's affordable to the customer. Like I mentioned, it creates a lot of these well-paid, highly skilled jobs. It can keep operating even during extreme weather events, heat waves, fires, because it's mostly underground, right? And then the thing on the surface is all just, steel and cement. And so outside of really, really extreme events, you can keep producing power. One thing that's really nice is it pairs really well with solar power, because obviously solar power, as you can imagine, is most productive during the summer when days are long and sunny. And actually, geothermal power, including these next generation technologies, is most productive during the winter when there's a higher temperature differential between the cold air and the hot steam. It sort of pulls it through the turbine with more force. And so it can kind of smooth out our system pretty well in that way. Like I mentioned, it uses less land. I think we're very, we live here too, right? Like, we're very sensitive to, this is a beautiful area. We don't just want to cover it up with solar panels. We want technologies that are sensitive to local needs and don't use too much land. And then again, with these new technologies, you can recirculate the same water through the closed system over and over again. So it's using a lot less water. There are a couple downsides. You need this high initial investment to get it up and running. Again, we think that once it is happening and it's sort of amortized, it's actually very cost effective for what it is. But it does require a high initial investment to drill the wells and build the plant. And so we're working with a couple of our partner companies to try and get grants. We just actually, very exciting news, hot off the press, we got a grant from the California Energy Commission last week to help us with sort of mapping subsurface environments and where we might want to put some of these wells. So that kind of defrays the cost to our customers. And then the other thing is, this is on the blue there, as with conventional geothermal technology, like at the geysers, there is the risk of causing earthquakes with these technologies, including enhanced geothermal systems. You're sending cold water down, that's hitting a hot rock, and just that kind of, I don't know what the right word is, kind of flash heating can destabilize the rock a little bit. And so what we're looking, we're demanding the absolute highest seismic safety standards from our partners as they pursue this. what we're looking at is actually that site in Utah is the most advanced, enhanced geothermal system on Earth. And they have this very, very sophisticated, they call it the stoplight protocol, where basically if they detect any sort of risk of earthquake, they say, okay, it's the red light, don't send any more water down, or yellow light, only a little bit, or proceed with caution. And they've been able to produce a lot of research on that, and they've actually never caused an earthquake big enough to be inconvenient, let alone dangerous. So we think it can be managed safely, but you have to have a very rigorous seismic safety protocol. So again, our goal is ultimately to build 600 megawatts of, or drive the development of 600 megawatts of new next generation geothermal power here locally. And so just to recap, if we can do that, we'll get to 100% clean energy around the clock that we're serving our customers. We'll create a lot of jobs, a lot of local economic development, and we'll help kind of catalyze the development of these new technologies that could then be used to help solve climate change around the world, wherever there's hot rock close to the Earth's surface, which is a lot of places, which is a big chunk of the world. So we're really excited that little old Sonoma County is actually part of helping drive this solution to climate change that, again, could ultimately be a key piece of the puzzle everywhere on Earth. So what have we done so far? This is a very long-term project. I mean, this is decades probably. So we've begun public outreach, like we're here today. And then the other thing we're running into actually is legal and regulatory barriers are very significant. California is just not, I think a lot of you are aware, it's not the world's easiest place to do business. And shocker. And for geothermal especially, it's technologies that are very complex. It's a very kind of niche thing in some ways compared to other industries that are larger and have more lobbyists and more just ability to kind of influence things in Sacramento. And so what we're finding is that there's a lot of very outdated laws and regulations on the books that are a real barrier to our ability to even begin here. So a lot of my job, and I'm happy to say more about this in the Q&A, is helping sponsor legislation in Sacramento that tries to kind of rectify some of those barriers and bring us more in line with where other states and countries are and kind of the best practices of how geothermal should be regulated while still maintaining a very strong, environmental protections and labor protections. Ultimately, if we can sort of work through that, we'll go on to have our partner companies acquire or lease sites. We'll have them drill exploration wells. So what you do is you identify a likely site based on geologic survey data or other sources. You can fly planes over actually and sort of sense magnetically where the magma is. But you probably need to drill a well or a pair of wells regardless, just to make sure the resource really is there in the way that you think it is. Because ultimately, we just don't know a lot about what the environment's like 10,000 feet down, right? And actually, one thing with these next generation technologies, I mean, we as a society have a lot of experience drilling through certain rock types where there's oil and gas, right? We've been doing that for 100 years. We actually even have a lot of experience drilling into these conventional geothermal fields that are naturally fractured. But we've never really had to drill into these solid hot rock areas because there was never any reason to, right? Just until the last few years when these technologies became available. And so a lot of this geology is still really poorly understood. So you need to drill this exploration well to make sure, okay, this resource is, the heat is there in the way that I think it's there, and I can drill to it in a way that's cost effective and economical, right? Because it could be there, but if it costs 5 times as much to drill, then you're probably not going to want to drill 20 more wells in the same place. Ultimately, they'll build a sort of smaller pilot phase, little mini power plant, again, to kind of confirm that it's all working the way we think it's working. And then ultimately build, the full-on power plants and we'll be finished. And again, that's probably 10, 12, 15 or more years out. 600 megawatts of power, that's far more than all of Sonoma and Mendocino counties use today. What we're trying to achieve is this economy of scale, right? We can't do this at the scale that we need for just 10% of our power supply. It wouldn't pencil out. And so we're trying to have these developers build, larger scale facilities. Then we get the right of first refusal as their partner on any deal that they bring to the market. And we also, again, get the economic benefit and the jobs here in the local community. And meanwhile, the benefit they get is that we help them with local outreach, and we also help them find other off-takers. In that vein, I think we've done a very we've had a lot of fun doing some initial community engagement on this. We've done different town hall meetings in Santa Rosa and Cloverdale, a bunch of presentations like this one. We've tried to really build relationships with the key local environmental organizations, unions, tribal governments, others, so that we're all on the same page and we're addressing any kind of questions or concerns that they have. We have an update every month to our community advisory committee, as well as our board of directors meetings. Those are, open to the public. We welcome anybody to attend. And then we're also, we're just trying to learn the best practices from similar projects in Nevada, Utah, Colorado, around the world, so that we can kind of, adhere to the gold standard here in Sonoma and Mendocino counties. Here's a little bit of what we've heard from that community engagement. I think, obviously, excuse me, this is a very environmentally aware community, which we really appreciate. People want to get to 100% clean energy. They want to do it in a way that reinvests locally, and we're not just sending all our money to some project, elsewhere. Energy costs are too high, right? This is probably the biggest one we hear, not even just at this GeoZone stuff, but just when people call our customer service line. What we're trying to do here, again, is wean off of these really expensive, really outdated natural gas plants. And then, public oversight and transparency is critical, right? We're talking about significant projects here that have I mentioned the earthquake risk, they use water. There's a lot to unpack. And so just making sure that we're kind of hand in hand with the community at every step of the way. So that was a lot, but I barely even scratched the surface. So I'm happy to just take a bunch of questions, and thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for Q&A. Who has a question? Yes.
Hi, thanks for your presentation this morning. It's illuminating. Having visited the Calpine facility up there in the geysers area, it's a pretty immense setup, though I don't know how old it is, but I don't know how much, I don't remember what the output is from that one, but I know there's several generators within that area for them. So when you say 600 megawatts, in putting into scale what we have at the existing, how many plants and how big would each one be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So, and actually the folks who worked at Calpine should feel free to correct me here, but so I think Calpine today is producing about 750 megawatt or 800 megawatts. But it really, I'm so glad you asked this. It's kind of a different beast. And this, and again, we're very supportive of Calpine. We buy a lot of power from Calpine and the geysers today. So this isn't saying one is better or worse, but the conventional hydrothermal, and actually, can I go back to the slide? I don't know if it's too late for the slideshow.
Too late.
Too late. It's too late. Well, if you remember the slide that had the sort of conventional hydrothermal, geothermal power versus the new technologies, the footprint on the surface is very different. Because what you have at Calpine is, and I'm not a scientist, so this is probably slightly wrong, but you have, all these different wells collecting steam from deep underground, and then you need to bring that, steam from those different wells in those, flow tubes to the power plant, right? And so that's why, if you guys have ever been up there, you're driving down the road and there's, giant pipes going over the road and just this huge complex, sort of gathering steam from all these different areas and then bringing it in. And then the power plant at the surface has the steam tower and condenser to recapture. And it's a large operation. With these new technologies at the surface, because again, it's just a sort of closed system, you can basically bring everything in underground, and then it's a much smaller facility at the surface because you don't have that steam recapturing component. And so it really is just, it was pretty enlightening to see it in action in Utah, and it wasn't complete, but it's just a large building, right? And you have a couple wellheads around it, but it's not very obtrusive. And actually for what it is, for clean energy, you think about like solar, wind, conventional geothermal. These new next generation geothermal technologies are probably one of the least footprint on the surface. So that's something we're excited about because I think we're very sensitive to. I mean, not only is land in this area obviously very expensive, but we want to maintain our sort of high quality kind of bucolic character here, right? We're not trying to sort of pave over a large section of the county. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for your talk. I have another question about the 600 megawatt thing. So you say that that's about the total demand from Mendocino and Sonoma counties. I think you said that Calpine is currently producing about 750 megawatts. So is your 600 megawatts, is that like the dirty part of Mendocino and Sonoma County, or is it the total demand, or what is that?
Yeah, great. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so actually 600 megawatts is more than we could use in Sonoma and Mendocino County. So sorry for the confusion. So I think I'm going to kind of make this number up, so maybe scrub this from the recording, but no, I'm kidding. I think our peak demand on like a mega heat wave in Sonoma and Mendocino counties is under 400 megawatts. And again, I'll get you the exact number if you want, but it's something like that. And so 600 megawatts is more than we could use. The thing so we buy our power from a variety of sources, right, as Sonoma Clean Power. We buy a significant amount from Calpine today. The challenge, and I mean, this is a good thing. The challenge is they're kind of bought up, right? So that 750 megawatts that they're producing, they're selling that to folks all over the state. So, down in LA and, PG&E buys some and, various others are buying it. And so we get our cut. But, I think originally when we were setting out on this journey, we actually approached Calpine and said, hey, can we get a little more? And they said, no, sorry, we're tapped out. We're already bought up. And so that was when we said, okay, we need to go add more ourselves because we're already getting some, but it's not enough to get us to 100% clean energy. And so to the other part of your question, why are we trying to develop 600 megawatts when that's more than we could ever use? It really, to get that cost effectiveness for the customer, you need to have that economy of scale. And so the idea is, again, the companies we're going to work with are going to build more than we could ever use, but we'll be their sort of most favored nation, kind of. We'll get the best deals because we're partnering with them. And it really doesn't actually, the last thing I'll say, it doesn't, this goes back to the last question, it doesn't really affect the local impact. You basically need the same, I mean, it does to some extent, but you need a similarly sized power plant to produce, 100 megawatts versus 1,000 megawatts. I mean, it's not a night and day difference. Thanks for asking.
This is a technical question. In the slide, you were showing a well going down that would be water being forced down into the earth. Maybe, you said 10,000 feet, maybe less. My experience with wells in the Midwest is that by doing that, you literally cause fracking. And so I'm concerned about how you would, the force with which you would force the water down, and then how you would force it through the rock or on the rock without causing fracking. And fracking causes small earthquakes, which causes houses to, all over the Midwest, houses fall apart. I mean, the chimneys come loose, all sorts of things. So I don't understand how what you're doing is different from the fracking that we see all across the Midwest.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'm actually really glad you asked because I was hoping to address that and then I just lost track of it. So let me break that up into two parts. So how is this different than fracking and then the earthquakes thing? So enhanced geothermal systems. So this is the technology I mentioned where you drill down and then you create an artificial fracture in the rock, kind of replicating what they have at Calpine, except that you're controlling the direction, right? So it's not this web of fractures. It's just sort of one way that you want it to go. And then you have another well at the back end where you bring the water back up. That was really made possible by learnings from the oil and gas fracking industry, to be frank. And that's a technology that's only emerged in the last few years because of things that they've started to sort of develop in fracking for oil and gas over the last, 15, 20 years. So let me preface this with, we as Sonoma Clean Power oppose fracking for oil and gas as an organization. We do not, we think it's terrible for the climate. We think it's terrible for the communities where it occurs. It's a bad thing, right? It involves all sorts of toxic chemicals that can get out into the groundwater and cause really horrible impacts to people, as well as, what you mentioned. So the problem is, we are burning natural gas today to keep the lights on, again, at times when, there's no sun, no wind, and batteries are empty. And so we see enhanced geothermal as being the right solution here because it is different in some key ways. So let me go over a few. So I think first and foremost, the biggest way it's different, and I should just preface this, is fracking for oil and gas causes climate change. Enhanced geothermal is part of the solution to climate change, right? So very foundationally different. But then even just in the mechanics, with fracking for oil and gas, what you're doing is you're sending water down that's typically loaded up with these like toxic slew of chemicals that will kind of scour the oil and gas out of the rock. That's going down. That could be interacting with groundwater at any stage in the process. You're doing it a lot shallower than enhanced geothermal would happen. So you're sending water down with toxic chemicals. You're grabbing the fossil fuels that are then going to be burned to cause climate change. And then you're bringing it back up, and you have to dispose of this produced water at the surface. And, I think this is where you see a lot of news stories about this. Oftentimes these companies don't dispose of the produced water in a safe way at all. And so it leaks into rivers or streams or aquifers, and has those toxic chemicals still in it, as well as oil and gas byproducts. And so it's a very problematic process. With enhanced geothermal systems, it's, what's moving through the system is basically just water. There are a few chemical additives, but it's nowhere on the scale of fracking for oil and gas. It's a few simple things like guar gum and stuff that's used to sort of lubricate the fracture, but it's largely just water. And you're sending it down in a steel-lined pipe that should have no interaction with the surrounding underground environment whatsoever until you get to that layer of solid hot rock, and then it should just be moving through this totally enclosed fracture system. And again, that's part of the it's not just a sort of altruistic or sort of civically minded thing. The operator actually doesn't want water escaping the system because that's your product, right? You want the same amount of water going through there so you can control how much heat comes to the surface. And so you're bringing it back up in another steel-lined pipe. And then at the surface, it's staying in a totally closed system where you're basically passing that water through a heat exchanger where the heat from the water comes into, the actual water doesn't touch it, but the heat is used to boil like a liquid that has a lower boiling point, like a vegetable oil or something. And that's used to create steam of that oil, spin a turbine. This is all happening in a totally enclosed system. So nothing from inside the system should ever come into contact with the outside. So we see it as pretty different than fracking for oil and gas. And then on the earthquakes front, that is, I think, a similarity, right? So it's not when you're creating the fracture that the earthquakes can happen. It's actually when you're operating the system. And so again, it's sort of that shock of the cold water coming in contact with the really hot rock and just kind of that shock to the system. So again, we're going to demand the absolute highest safety protocols on that front. What we've seen in Utah is that when they do the gold standard of seismic safety, they've been able to avoid causing earthquakes to date that are dangerous or even just noticeable. What I think a lot of the problem with fracking for oil and gas on earthquakes too is, you have these, oil and gas companies that have more power than God and have watered down a lot of these regulations, right? And that's not, we completely disagree with that.
Okay, we have another
Thank
one here.
Hi, I'm trying to get an idea of how excited I should be getting about all of this. I've
Very.
I've always felt fortunate that we live locally where we have this source of power. and virtually all of our personal power comes from either green energy or our solar panels, and we feel good about that. The question I have is how excited I should get about the state, the country, and the world, and how much, for example, will ultimately, do you imagine, geothermal power supply toward the 100% goal in California?
Yeah, thank you. I would be very excited about this. This was actually this GeoZone was a big part of why I wanted to come work at Sonoma Clean Power in the first place, because I thought, wow, this is something that's really cutting edge that nobody else in the state is doing currently, at least. That could be a key ingredient of taking on climate change around the world. I think so. Obviously, California is leading the way on these climate issues. And then again, I'm very biased, but I'll say this because this is why I wanted to come work here. I'm not just saying it because I work here now. Sonoma Clean Power is really leading the way for California on this stuff. I think, you think about California is responsible for 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions on Earth. I mean, we could eliminate our emissions tomorrow and the temperature of the Earth would be unaffected. And Sonoma Clean Power is, Sonoma and Mendocino counties were, 1% of that, right? I think our power is as the sort of first mover or the model of how to resolve these problems, and then that can be replicated elsewhere. And that's what we've seen in a lot of ways. I think what's exciting here is you think about anywhere on Earth, they can be adopting solar power and wind power and batteries at a very large scale. But unless they have something that can operate, again, at 3 a.m. after a cloudy, windless day, they're going to have to keep those fossil fuel plants running and on life support. And as long as those are still part of the system, usually, like, again, with these plants in LA, you can't just turn them on when you need them. They have to be running all the time to some degree. And so you're locking in carbon emissions in a very significant way, as long as you don't have a clean energy source that can kind of fill in the gaps. And so this is sort of a hot topic right now. People call it clean firm power as opposed to clean kind of intermittent or variable power. And, nobody's really cracked the code yet. I mean, I think there's different things that are out there. You can't really do it currently with batteries because you'd have to build like 80 batteries to get you through that one long, dark, windless week. So, there's different, people talk about nuclear power. People talk about, different, long-term sort of hydropower storage where you pump water uphill when you have too much power and then release it But realistically, I think what our analysts have found is this next generation geothermal stuff, for what it is probably the most cost-effective and exciting opportunity out there. And so what we're trying to do, in addition to getting benefits for our customers and creating jobs locally, is help kind of catalyze the development of these new technologies in the same way that happened with solar or wind power 20 years ago, where it was super expensive and then the government stepped in and others stepped in and invested money and the price came tumbling down. We're really trying to do the same thing here and say, okay, if we can be one of the first movers here and kind of de-risk these geothermal technologies, then they can be used all over the place. Oh, and I see you have a follow-up. Yeah, great question. So the question was, in terms of the percentage of the solution, where do you see geothermal 20 years from now? I'm going to call me in 20 years and we'll see if I was right. I think that probably geothermal will never be that big of a percentage of the mix because, I can totally eat crow here, but my guess is something like solar power or batteries is always going to be cheaper, right? You're just going to want as much geothermal as you need to kind of fill in those gaps. So on paper, it's not going to look like a huge percent of the system. I mean, again, like I said, we're at 90% clean energy today. Some of that's geothermal, but not much. Let's say we're at 80%, clean energy today with no geothermal. But I think the thing is, again, it's like until you, and I'm so glad you asked, until you have that clean, firm power that, I think what we think is going to be geothermal, the whole system is like, you kind of have to have two systems. You have your 80% solar wind battery system, and then you have your 100% gas system that's just kind of standing by to fill in that extra 20%. And that's incredibly costly, and you're also keeping the polluting, toxic gas plants, sticking around. And so I think I wouldn't even say it's so much like what percent, but I think it is that linchpin of getting the whole thing to kind of work together. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the talk. Question is, it's really very local. I'm hearing a lot of talk about possibly Oakmont becoming I guess, self-sustaining microgrid.
Great.
How do you see your organization fitting in with that? It seemed to me like, based on what you just said, it could be very, very beneficial to both.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, so at a macro level, Sonoma Clean Power, I think that's our whole kind of reason we exist is, what do our customers want in terms of local energy solutions that can help them save money and also solve our environmental crisis? And then how can we, use the kind of expertise and capacity that we've created to help them get there? And so we're working with different communities and tribes and others on kind of what are your energy needs and how can we help you get there across a range of means. I think the cool thing, actually, this is also just in the last few months. So I had a slide, and I didn't talk about it, but it showed a map of Sonoma and Mendocino counties, and then it showed this area around the existing geysers field where the hottest rock comes close to the Earth's surface. And we actually, like I mentioned, we don't want to operate in that geysers area specifically because the rock's fractured. And so if you're trying to create this closed system, those natural fractures are going to, break that up and cause the water to get out. But around the kind of rim of the geysers, the rock is equally hot, but it's solid. And so that's, we thought, the best place to do this kind of new technology up near, Geyserville and Cloverdale. But what's exciting is actually one of the companies we're working with that I mentioned, now they have this sort of new technique where they can go deeper and get hotter rock in different places. And so this is very tentative, but, we're sort of thinking about like, is this something we can look at in different communities around the county or elsewhere where it's like, or in Mendocino, where it's like, if a local community wants to have its own energy source right there, we could do that sort of pilot program with Ever, at that site. So I'd love to connect you with the folks on our team who'd be better equipped to talk more. Thank you.
If you step back to today, we've moved from a very strong believer in climate change to a drill, baby, drill. And I don't mean drill your way.
Right.
This next 3 years, you're going to be living in that world. What do you feel about the likelihood that you will be able to proceed and or have any government money based on the world we actually live in?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I think a couple thoughts. I think when Trump was elected the first time, I was working at the Sierra Club at that point, and I was just like despondent, right? Like, this is horrible for the climate. I think the difference now, it's really bad, but I think the difference now is you look at like what's happening in like China or parts of Africa or, like clean technology is taking off around the world. And regardless of what Trump and his cronies want to do, they can't stop that, right? I think them repealing all the Biden, climate laws, that was a big setback, but it wasn't, I just think the cat's out of the bag in some ways, in a good way, but we're still not doing nearly enough. There's a lot more to do. And I'll actually tell you, even in California, like I said, I think the power of kind of California is we can be the model or the sort of, we can be the first mover and kind of work through these challenges and create the model and the kind of products and sources that can be then used around the world and replicated elsewhere. And again, I'm biased, but I think the power of Sonoma Clean Power is we can be the first mover of California on a lot of these things. The thing is, California is not on track to meet our climate goals today, even regardless of who's the president. What we're running into is, I think, a lot of different things, but in the electricity space specifically, we have a law that says, hey, we have to be at 100% clean electricity today, by 2045. We're not close to that today, and we're not really, on track. And I think the things that are keeping us from being on track are kind of twofold. I think one is exactly what this talk was about, which is we're building plenty of solar and wind and stuff, but we're not building those clean, firm power sources like geothermal that can actually get us all the way. So maybe we can get kind of close, but we're not going to get all the way. And so I think even with Trump in the White House, what we can do locally is say, okay, how can we solve that problem so that California can actually, be on track and be this model of how to be on track to get to 100% clean power. And then I think the other thing is, just to be totally frank, is we're not able to build clean projects at the rate we need to because of the sort of red tape, for lack of a better word. And this is what a lot of our work in Sacramento is focused on. In Nevada and Utah, it takes a tiny fraction of the time it would take here in California to build a new geothermal power plant. But the problem is those, Utah, they don't believe in climate change. So you can build it there to serve California, but at a certain point, there's only so much transmission, right? So if we want, again, just going back to geothermal, but I think this is true for every clean technology. If we want it to happen and we want to bring that price down by creating the market, we need to build it here, but we need to actually be able to build it. And what we're running into is you have the state agency, the Division of Geologic Energy Management, is so understaffed that they literally just a month ago asked the governor to veto a bill that we sponsored saying, hey, please update your regulations so that you can safely regulate these new technologies so that those new technologies can come in. Well, they vetoed that because they said we don't have the capacity. And so it's kind of like at a certain point, we have to be able to build clean energy and electric car charging and everything else here, or we're not going to make it. Did that answer your question? Hopefully, yeah.
Hello, Janice here. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, but I also want to say I was on the phone with Sonoma Clean Power on Thursday because I found out that you have a tremendous thing going on with induction cooktops.
Oh, yes.
And fabulous incentives to change, and that it does save energy, and it's wonderful. Anyway, I wanted to know where I could find the numbers on the website as far as if they are public, the investments and what it takes, and if any of it's if it's private or all public, or how it breaks down. Be interested in that. And then I'd also like to know if you're advertising at the universities for people to be attracted to Sonoma Clean Power, especially when I'm finding out that you're at other states and working. And I'd also like to know how AI fits into this. So I don't know if you can kind of wind that up.
No,
but,
totally. Yeah.
But I had to wait a long time, so thank you.
Thank you.
It was a great thing. I've seen you at the supervisors and at City Council. This was the most explicit and expansive on anything that I've seen, and it was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Well, let me work backwards. So AI, yeah. We didn't get too into it, but just in the last couple of years, I think many of you are aware, this AI revolution has occurred, and it requires just an absolutely colossal amount of electricity, right? And what that really means is you have these AI data centers where there's millions upon millions of computer chips, forming this artificial mind. And those chips operating produces a lot of heat. And so you need to pass water through this whole system to cool it down. But then the water gets really hot. And so basically cooling the water, both beforehand and then afterwards, requires a lot of electricity. And that's what that electricity goes to. And so this is one of the big drivers of growing electricity demand. Now, the one caveat to all this, so right now it looks like electricity demand is going to go through the roof, because of this. But I think it's possible, and I mean, this isn't my thought, I think this is experts in the field, say, that could be the case, or it could be the case that in a couple of years, somebody invents a much more efficient chip where you're just, it's working much more efficiently and it's not producing the same amount of heat, and so you actually don't need as much cooling. And so maybe this electricity demand isn't going to be what we think. But right now, today, I was actually last year I was in Pennsylvania, and we drove past 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. They're starting it back up to power data centers, because they're just doing whatever they can to get electricity. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's very concerning for the climate, because you look at in Texas, they're saying, hey, we're just going to build 50 new gas plants to power all these data centers. Well, that's horrible for the environment, right? But they don't care. They're doing it anyway. But there's also an opportunity, I think, for the climate with AI, where again, what they need is around the clock power. And so to the extent that some of these companies, not all, but some have said, hey, we want to try to do this with clean power, well, they're going to need something like next generation geothermal that can be producing power to cool the water around the clock. They can't do it with solar power, right? Because then what happens at night, or even once the battery is empty. So it's something we're looking at as an organization, and actually we haven't totally cracked the code yet. But how can we work with these different tech companies that may want some of that GeoZone power ultimately for their data center operations, and that could help kind of defray the cost to our customers, and also help us. They have a lot of political power, help us advance the policies in Sacramento that we need to be successful. So that was that one. On your first question, where can you find more information about this? So I'll give you my card after this too, but I would say, going back to any meeting of our community advisory committee or board of directors, anyone's welcome to attend. But even if you don't attend, we'll have the latest updates and numbers in the packet that goes to the members of the board or committee, and that'll be on our website a few days before. And so you can really get the sort of deep dive from our analysts on that. And then what was your question in the middle? Sorry. Oh, no worries. Well, we can talk after too. Yeah, perfect.
Hi, I'd like to speak to the microgrid that the gentleman brought up over here. From 2018 to 2022, I was chair of a committee to create a microgrid in Oakmont, and we had many meetings with Sonoma Clean Power, a wonderful group of people, and they were very supportive of us. There really were too many regulatory and legal issues for us to move on. The primary one was that in 2019, a bill was passed through the Senate that would create community microgrids. And we are in a perfect situation here in the way of the PG&E wiring is set up for our community. There's two substations, but one for the south end and one for the kind of more northerly westerly end. Anyway, basically to get to my point, setting up a microgrid is a fantastic idea, but here we are 6 years after 2019, and there's still no movement legally in the state to create a microgrid for a community like ours, and zero governmental funding of any kind. So a microgrid for Oakmont, for the electric, using solar would require total participation of the community, meaning all of the panels would have to be on homes and have to be connected through that. And if we did do that, if we did create a microgrid, we would be classified as a supplier of electricity. And so we'd go on the market, and Sonoma Clean Power would be the company, the group that would buy all of our electricity. So just wanted to clarify that we have done this. We've jumped through all the hoops, and we missed the last one.
Thank you.
And this will be our second to last question.
Hi. Hello. We had a cabin up in Hot Springs Road in Anderson Springs, and we had several earthquakes all the time. You're probably well aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
My son-in-law and I started an organization up there to contact Calpine and see what we could do about it. Well, we didn't get much help from the state, of course, and I contacted Markley, or whatever his name was, that was in charge of the environment, I think, at the time. And he said whatever the Calpine and the county wanted. So anyway, we had a lot of earthquakes. So my son contacted Oppenheimer, and he said when the injections stop, the earthquakes stop. So I thought that was interesting. Also, I'd like you to comment on the history of how our wastewater got up to that, and why my property taxes went up again for the injection water.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So on the wastewater thing, I feel like I shouldn't comment, because that's as you said, that's Calpine, right? I mean, we're one of many power companies buying from Calpine, but we don't control them. They're their own company. They have their own agreement with the city of Santa Rosa on that. So I don't want to get over my skis or kind of speak for them. On the earthquakes thing, yeah, I mean, I think, you're hitting the nail on the head. It's today now up in the geysers area, as we talk to people up there, that's the number one concern is we're getting earthquakes now from the existing operations, long before we've built anything. This is something that's happening. So we think, I think two things. I mean, one was kind of what I said before of as a public agency that's owned and controlled by the public, our goal is to just demand the absolute gold standard of earthquake safety for anybody that wants to be one of our partners on this GeoZone effort. The other thing too is, I didn't get into this, but there is some evidence that these new next generation technologies have less earthquake risk than the conventional technologies. Not none, there's still a risk, so I don't want to overstate it. But because you're sort of threading the needle instead of like broadcasting cold water out into the whole system, it should be less impactful to the underground environment. So thank you for the question.
Can we give a hand for our speaker today? Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for having me, really.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week. Could turn your phone on if you wanted to.
Thanks so much.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to ask my question. But anyway, but I'm from Market. So I was looking at your very first point. Could I borrow you? You could agree with that.
Well, we have a whole team, but I agree with you.
Does he want to have his picture taken?
Just so we don't have to
Right, and because your graphics are still kind of hard to understand. And, coupled with real life, like the plane overhead that, took you to understand what that thing that they do, that they see the, I'm just going, how do they even know it's down there? I just think that would be so fascinating to find somebody to do that. Yeah. And the movie was for that.
I'll give you my card. Thank you. I'll take that next one.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for the great question. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Cool. And here, I'll give you my card too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions.
Yes.
Oh, and the university.
Yeah, thank you. That was it.
What's here?
But anyway, I'm glad to get your cards, but I didn't get your name. But it was fantastic to talk to see This is with hide captions. Okay. This is with hide captions. Which one is that? Why am I getting two? Jesus.